Pam Bondi walked into the office that morning with her usual calm and confident stride. The sunlight streamed through the tall windows, reflecting off the polished floors, and the hum of the air conditioning mixed with the faint chatter of staff getting ready for the day. It was a busy office, papers stacked on desks, phones ringing occasionally, and the smell of coffee lingering in the air. Pam had seen this scene countless times, yet there was something different about today. She felt it in the subtle glances, the barely concealed smirks, and the soft chuckles that seemed to disappear the moment she looked their way. She settled at her desk, organized her papers, and glanced over the day's schedule. Meetings, briefings, and a few appointments that required her careful attention. She knew that every decision she made carried weight, not just in the office, but in the lives of the people depending on her work. Yet beneath the professional routine there was an undercurrent of something she had sensed before. A lack of respect. A quiet mockery that had been growing. Pam had always been aware of people underestimating her. It was something she had learned to recognize early in her career. Some would smile politely, nod in agreement, but their eyes told another story. They thought her decisions were too careful, too precise, or that she was too focused on detail to notice the bigger picture. In this office, however, it wasn't just a fleeting thought. She had noticed the whispers, the small jokes shared behind her back, and the way her suggestions were sometimes met with a subtle eye roll or a quick glance exchanged between colleagues. It was not open disrespect, at least not yet. But it was there, quietly brewing in the corners of conversations. Pam had seen enough to understand that it could grow if left unchecked. She didn't react immediately. She never had. She had learned the value of patience, of watching and understanding before acting. She took mental notes, remembering names, gestures, and tones, cataloging the behavior carefully. It was a skill she had honed over years of working in public offices, a skill that had saved her from countless mistakes. That morning, a small incident caught her attention. One of the newer staff members had accidentally spilled a cup of coffee near a stack of important files. It was a minor thing, easily cleaned, but the way the other staff reacted was telling. A few exchanged quick smirks, some whispered to each other in the hallway, and one even chuckled softly, thinking she would not notice. Pam saw everything. She didn't flinch, didn't make a scene, but inside she cataloged it. She recognized the pattern. A mix of overconfidence, lack of awareness, and a subtle desire to undermine her authority. She continued with her morning routine, attending to emails, reviewing documents, and preparing for the first meeting of the day. The office moved around her, full of energy, some focused on their tasks, others clearly distracted. Yet she noticed the small things, the way eyes darted away when she approached, the hurried adjustments of posture, and the faint nervous laughter that tried to mask their discomfort when she walked by. It was not her style to confront people in such moments, and she knew that acting too soon could backfire. As the clock approached mid-morning, a meeting was called to discuss upcoming projects. Pam entered the conference room with her usual composure. The room was filled with staff members, some seated with confident expressions, others a bit more cautious. The air was light with small talk and quiet laughter, a contrast to the serious topics that were about to be discussed. She could feel the energy in the room, a mix of casual confidence and subtle underestimation. Pam began the meeting with a calm greeting and a brief overview of the agenda. She spoke clearly, her tone measured, and her eyes moved across the room, observing reactions carefully. Some nodded attentively, others pretended to follow along while their minds seemed elsewhere. A few exchanged glances, whispering just softly enough for her to notice. It was all small, almost imperceptible to someone not paying attention, but to Pam it spoke volumes. During the discussion, she presented her points with clarity and precision. Every suggestion was backed by facts, every recommendation thought through carefully. Yet the subtle smirks persisted. One staff member seated near the back made a quiet joke, thinking it went unnoticed. Another chuckled softly at something unrelated, trying to mask a sense of superiority. Pam's eyes caught them immediately. She did not react outwardly, but inside she recognized the risk of letting such attitudes continue unchecked. As the meeting progressed, the staff's confidence in their mockery became more evident. They seemed to believe that she would not confront them, that her calm demeanor meant weakness or lack of awareness. But Pam had long learned that the quiet ones were often the most dangerous. She listened carefully, allowed them to speak, and nodded politely, giving no hint of her internal observations. Every question she asked, every response she made, was carefully designed to gauge their understanding and subtly challenge their assumptions without appearing confrontational. By the end of the meeting, it was clear that Pam had gathered a full picture of the office dynamics. She had noted who was involved in the subtle mockery, who followed along, and who remained neutral. She also understood the hierarchy of influence within the group, the staff members who led the jokes, those who encouraged them, and those who quietly observed. It was a web of behavior, but one she could navigate with careful planning. After the meeting, the office returned to its usual rhythm, but the atmosphere had shifted slightly, though none of the staff realized it. Pam walked back to her desk, thoughtful but composed. She understood that the next steps were crucial. Acting too early could provoke unnecessary resistance, but waiting too long could allow the behavior to solidify. She needed a strategy, one that would not only address the mockery but also reinforce her authority without creating hostility. She spent the next hour reviewing documents, making notes, and mentally preparing for the upcoming days. Pam was meticulous in her work, and her mind was always active even in moments that appeared calm. She considered how to approach the situation, thinking about each staff member individually and collectively. She knew that demonstrating intelligence and composure was far more effective than direct confrontation. Pam also reflected on her past experiences, remembering times when she had faced similar challenges. Each situation had taught her valuable lessons: the importance of patience, the need to observe before acting, and the power of subtlety in addressing disrespect. She understood that people often revealed their true character through small actions, and that by paying attention she could anticipate behavior and respond strategically. By late morning, Pam felt confident in her understanding of the office dynamics. She had seen enough to know that the staff's mockery, while currently subtle, could escalate if unchecked. Yet she also recognized that their underestimation of her was an opportunity. It allowed her to plan carefully, to position herself in a way that would maximize her influence and demonstrate her capability without unnecessary conflict. As she walked past the staff during a brief break, she noticed a few of them whispering and exchanging glances. One of them attempted a small joke as she passed, but this time, she simply smiled politely and continued. Her smile was calm, unassuming, but there was an edge to it that they could not detect. She had seen enough to know that the time for action was not yet, but that her moment would come. The day continued with routine tasks, brief conversations, and small administrative duties. Yet, beneath the surface there was a quiet tension, a subtle game of awareness and observation that only Pam seemed to fully understand. She moved through her responsibilities with grace, never revealing the depth of her attention or the strategy forming in her mind. By the end of the day, she had created a mental map of the office, a clear understanding of the behavior, the alliances, and the subtle hierarchies that influenced the dynamics. She had identified those who were key instigators of the mockery, those who followed along, and those who remained neutral. It was a foundation, a preparation for what would come next. Pam left the office that evening with the same calm confidence she had walked in with. The sunlight had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor, but she remained focused and composed. She knew that the office was unaware of the full extent of her awareness. They did not know that their small jokes, their whispers, and their smirks had been noticed and catalogued. They had no idea that she was already planning the steps that would eventually change the balance of respect in the office. As she drove home, her mind replayed the day. Each interaction, each subtle gesture, each whispered laugh. She understood the risks but also the opportunity. The staff had underestimated her, assumed that her calm demeanor meant weakness, and failed to recognize her intelligence and strategic thinking. That misjudgment would be their mistake, and she was determined to handle it in a way that was both decisive and composed. Pam Bondi's day had been ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in awareness. She had witnessed the mockery, catalogued the behavior, and begun planning a response that would be effective, measured, and unassuming. She understood that true power was often quiet, observed in patience, and revealed in the right moment, and she was ready for that moment, even if the staff had no idea it was coming. By the time she arrived home, the next morning, Pam Bondi returned to the office with the same quiet confidence she always carried. The sun had just begun to filter through the windows, casting a warm glow across the desks and papers scattered around. The office was alive with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clicking, and soft conversations blending into a low hum. She greeted a few staff members politely as she passed, noting the familiar glances that quickly turned away, the little smiles that tried to hide a sense of superiority. Nothing had changed, at least on the surface. Pam settled at her desk and began reviewing the reports that had come in overnight. Her mind was focused, attentive to every detail, but she could feel the subtle energy in the office. The staff who had been mocking her yesterday were already whispering and exchanging looks again, small jokes and comments passing quietly between them. It was as if they had decided that nothing had come from yesterday's behavior, that she was oblivious or too patient to act. Pam observed them carefully, noting each small movement and every tone of voice. She understood that their behavior was not meant to be harmful in the grand sense, but it revealed something important. They underestimated her. She had always known that people underestimated her. It was a lesson she had learned long ago, and it had shaped the way she approached every situation. She never acted in haste, never reacted impulsively. Instead, she studied, observed, and waited for the right moment. That moment had not come yet, but she could feel that it was approaching. The staff's mockery was subtle, but it was growing, and she knew that unchecked it could become a problem. Pam's attention was drawn to a small group gathered near the corner of the office. They were laughing softly at something one of them had said, glancing over occasionally as if daring her to notice. She did notice. Every whisper, every smirk, and every small gesture was catalogued carefully in her mind. She did not interrupt or call them out. That would have been too obvious, too confrontational. Instead, she continued her work, maintaining her calm exterior while inside. She was fully aware of every detail. As the morning moved on, Pam attended another meeting. This one focused on an important project with tight deadlines. The room was filled with the same staff, and the air carried the same light energy of casual confidence. They spoke freely, sometimes too freely, making small jokes and comments that they thought were harmless. Pam listened carefully, taking note of both the content of their conversation and the subtle attitudes behind it. She asked questions, sometimes directly, sometimes indirectly, to gauge their understanding and attention. Her questions were precise, pointed, but delivered in a calm and professional tone. The staff answered confidently at first, some even trying to impress their colleagues, while others seemed nervous under her steady gaze. Pam could see the slight hesitation in a few answers, the brief flicker of uncertainty that betrayed their confidence. She made a mental note of it, understanding that these small cracks would be important later. She did not press too hard, but she allowed the conversation to unfold naturally, letting the staff reveal themselves without realizing it. By mid-morning, the subtle mockery began to escalate. One staff member made a quiet joke about a recent decision Pam had made, thinking it would go unnoticed. Another smirked, clearly amused, while a third whispered something under their breath. Pam's eyes caught them immediately, and her expression remained calm. She did not respond, did not react, but inside, she catalogued the behavior carefully. She understood that they were testing her patience, trying to see how far they could go before she responded. Pam's strategy was simple: observe, understand, and wait. She knew that reacting too early could create unnecessary conflict and reduce her influence. By allowing them to reveal their attitudes, she was gathering valuable information that would help her act decisively when the time was right. She also understood the importance of timing. The right moment, when she had full control and understanding, would allow her to address the mockery effectively without losing her composure. During lunch, Pam walked through the office quietly, observing the staff as they chatted and moved about. Some tried to continue their small jokes, while others seemed more cautious. She noted who was involved in the behavior and who remained neutral. She also observed their interactions with each other, understanding the subtle hierarchy and influence within the group. It was a complex dynamic, but one she could navigate with careful planning. As the afternoon approached, Pam returned to her desk to prepare for another series of meetings. She reviewed documents, checked emails, and made notes on the day's observations. Her focus was unwavering, her mind active and alert. She thought about how to approach the situation in a way that would be effective and measured. She knew that confrontation would not be necessary if she could demonstrate her awareness and capability subtly, yet firmly. A small incident later that afternoon brought the situation into sharper focus. One of the staff members had made a mistake on a report, something minor but noticeable. A few others laughed quietly, exchanging knowing looks. Pam noticed immediately. She did not react with anger or frustration. Instead, she used the opportunity to address the situation calmly and professionally. She asked a few questions about the report, allowing the staff to explain themselves. As they spoke, it became clear that their confidence was misplaced. Their answers were incomplete, and the gaps in their understanding were apparent. Pam's calm and composed questioning revealed the truth without embarrassment or direct confrontation. The staff began to realize, even if only subconsciously, that she was fully aware of their actions and their attitudes. Her steady presence, her careful listening, and her pointed questions demonstrated a level of intelligence and observation that they had underestimated. It was a quiet but powerful way to shift the balance of awareness in the room. By the end of the afternoon, the staff's behavior had begun to change subtly. Some who had been mocking became more cautious, their smiles less frequent, their whispers quieter. They had sensed, even if they could not articulate it, that Pam Bondi was not unaware of their actions. She had not confronted them directly, but she had demonstrated her awareness in a way that commanded respect. Pam herself reflected on the day's events with calm satisfaction. She knew that the subtle mockery was not malicious in intent, but it had revealed a fundamental misjudgment of her character and capability. She understood that respect could not be demanded through anger or force, but could be established through observation, patience, and strategic action. She had begun to set the stage for a more decisive response, one that would correct the underestimation without creating unnecessary conflict. As the office quieted down and staff began to prepare for the end of the day, Pam reviewed her mental notes. She had identified key patterns of behavior, the staff members most involved in the mockery, and the subtle hierarchies within the group. She understood their personalities, their tendencies, and their weaknesses. This knowledge was invaluable. It would allow her to act decisively when the moment was right, demonstrating her authority and intelligence without unnecessary drama. Walking through the office one last time before leaving, Pam noticed the small glances that were now tinged with caution. The staff had begun to realize that their underestimation of her was dangerous. They were more careful in their conversations, less likely to make casual jokes and more attentive to her presence. Pam did not gloat or draw attention to the change. She simply continued her work with calm authority, her awareness and composure speaking louder than words ever could. On her way home, Pam reflected on the day and the subtle victories she had achieved. She had not needed to confront anyone directly, but she had begun to shift the dynamic in her favor. The staff's behavior had started to change, and she had gathered the information necessary to plan her next steps. She understood that patience was as important as intelligence, and that timing would be critical in fully addressing the situation. Pam's strategy was clear: continue observing, continue gathering information, and prepare for the decisive moment when she would fully reveal her awareness and capability. The staff had underestimated her, assumed that her calm demeanor was a sign of weakness, and failed to recognize the intelligence and strategic thinking she brought to every situation. That misjudgment would be their mistake, and she was ready to use it to her advantage. By the time she reached home, the city lights were glowing softly, reflecting on the streets and buildings. Pam felt a sense of calm determination, knowing that the day had gone exactly as she intended. The staff had revealed themselves through their behavior, and she had gathered the insights necessary to plan her next move. She knew that the subtle mockery was only the beginning of a story, and that the next steps would be crucial in fully establishing her authority and commanding the respect she deserved. Pam Bondi's day had been ordinary in appearance, yet extraordinary in observation and awareness. She had witnessed the subtle mockery, cataloged the behavior, and begun preparing for a strategic response that would be measured, effective, and unassuming. She understood that true power often comes quietly, through patience, observation, and timing, and she was ready for the moment when her awareness and intelligence would become unmistakably clear. The following morning, the office buzzed with its usual energy, but there was a subtle change in the air. The staff, still carrying the confidence of the previous days, seemed slightly more cautious. Some exchanged glances as if sensing an unspoken tension, though they could not pinpoint why. Pam Bondi arrived with her characteristic calm, her eyes sharp and observant, taking in every detail of the office environment. She knew today would be different. The time had come to start shifting the balance not with force, but with careful and precise action. Pam began her day quietly, reviewing the files on her desk, scanning through reports and notes from the previous days. She had cataloged the behaviors, the whispers, the subtle mockery, and now she was ready to take the first steps toward asserting her awareness in a way that would leave a lasting impression. She understood the power of timing, and she knew that small, strategic moves could accomplish more than direct confrontation ever could. A meeting was scheduled mid-morning with several staff members to discuss a critical project with tight deadlines. As Pam entered the room, she noticed the familiar looks of casual confidence, the whispers exchanged as she passed by. She allowed herself a quiet smile, though no one could detect it. She had already observed enough to know who would be involved in the subtle mockery, and she had prepared her strategy accordingly. The meeting began with routine updates, but Pam steered the discussion toward more detailed aspects of the project. She asked questions that seemed ordinary at first, yet they were designed to uncover gaps in knowledge and understanding. Her tone was calm and professional, never accusatory, but each question required careful thought. The staff responded confidently at first, assuming that she was merely checking facts, but as the discussion unfolded, it became clear that some of their knowledge was incomplete. Pam maintained her composure, listening intently, nodding occasionally, and allowing the staff to speak. She did not rush them or interrupt, but she paid close attention to every hesitation, every slip, every moment where confidence wavered. She understood that these small details revealed more than words alone could. By allowing the staff to speak freely, she created a situation where their own actions exposed the gaps in their preparation and understanding. As the meeting progressed, a staff member made a comment meant to sound clever, a small joke aimed at lightening the tension. It was the kind of comment that had been whispered and smirked over in previous days. Pam's eyes met theirs briefly, and she asked a question that seemed ordinary but subtly highlighted the lack of depth in their response. The staff member hesitated, searching for an answer, and the room grew quiet for a moment. It was a small shift, almost imperceptible to anyone not paying attention, but Pam noticed. She had begun to change the energy in the room without raising her voice or showing frustration. Other staff members who had been quietly confident now seemed a little unsettled. They were beginning to realize that Pam was not only aware of their behavior, but she was using it strategically. She was not confronting them directly, but her questions and observations were forcing them to reveal their knowledge and understanding, or the lack thereof. The subtle mockery that had seemed so harmless before was starting to lose its power. Pam continued to guide the conversation with calm precision. She asked questions that required critical thinking, encouraging staff to think beyond the surface level. She praised correct answers where appropriate, maintaining a professional and balanced approach, but she did not allow any gaps in understanding to go unnoticed. Her awareness was evident, even if the staff could not articulate it fully. The room felt different now, less casual, more focused, as the staff adjusted their behavior in response to her presence and questions. After the meeting, Pam returned to her office with the same calm demeanor, but inside she felt a quiet satisfaction. The first steps of her strategy were unfolding exactly as she had planned. By allowing the staff to reveal their knowledge or the gaps in it, she had subtly begun to shift the balance of respect in the office. She knew that patience and observation were powerful tools, and she had used them effectively. In the afternoon, another incident provided an opportunity to reinforce her awareness. A minor error had occurred in a report that was to be submitted to higher authorities. Normally, such a mistake might have been dismissed or blamed on someone else, but Pam used it as a teaching and observation moment. She gathered the staff involved and asked questions about the process, guiding them through a review of their work. Her tone remained calm and professional, but the questions required precision and careful thought. The staff initially answered with confidence, assuming that Pam was merely double-checking their work. However, as the review continued, the gaps in their understanding became apparent. Pam pointed out inconsistencies subtly, framing her observations as part of the learning process rather than direct criticism. The staff began to realize, even if only subconsciously, that she had been aware of their behavior and their knowledge all along. Their confidence wavered slightly and some exchanged nervous glances, unsure how to respond. Pam used the moment to emphasize the importance of attention to detail and preparation. She did not berate anyone or raise her voice. Instead, she demonstrated that awareness, intelligence, and strategic thinking were more powerful than casual confidence or subtle mockery. The staff were learning, without her needing to say it directly, that underestimating her had consequences. The lesson was clear, yet delivered in a professional and composed manner that maintained respect for everyone involved. Later in the afternoon, Pam noticed a few staff members gathering quietly near the break area, exchanging whispers and small laughs. She walked by calmly, her presence commanding attention without effort. Some of the staff tried to suppress their reactions, realizing that she had noticed them. Her calm awareness spoke volumes. She did not confront them directly, but the message was unmistakable. She was aware, observant, and fully in control of the situation. By the end of the day, the subtle dynamics in the office had shifted noticeably. Staff members who had previously been confident in their casual mockery were now more cautious in their interactions. They spoke more carefully, exchanged fewer glances, and seemed more aware of Pam's presence. It was a quiet victory, achieved without confrontation, without anger, and without unnecessary conflict. Pam had used observation, patience, and strategic questioning to begin establishing her authority in a way that commanded respect. Pam herself reflected on the day's events with calm satisfaction. She knew that this was only the beginning. The staff had revealed themselves through their behavior, and she had gathered invaluable insights into their personalities, tendencies, and weaknesses. She had begun to assert her awareness subtly, planting the seeds for a more decisive response that would come later. As she prepared to leave the office, Pam reviewed her mental notes. She had identified who was most involved in the subtle mockery, who encouraged it, and who remained neutral. She had observed the hierarchy of influence within the staff and understood how to navigate it strategically. The next steps would require careful thought, but she was ready. The staff's underestimation of her had created an opportunity, and she planned to use it to full effect. Walking through the office one last time, Pam noticed the subtle changes in behavior. Staff who had been openly casual in their interactions were now quieter, more cautious, and more attentive. The office energy had shifted, and she knew that her influence was beginning to take hold. She had not needed to confront anyone directly, but her awareness and composure had made a significant impact. On her way home, Pam reflected on the subtle victories of the day. She had managed to assert her presence and intelligence without anger or aggression, using observation and strategic questioning to shift the office dynamics. She understood that patience and timing were critical, and she had laid the groundwork for the next steps in her plan. The staff had underestimated her, assumed that her calm demeanor indicated weakness, and failed to recognize the depth of her intelligence and strategic thinking. That underestimation would soon be their mistake. Pam Bondi's day had been extraordinary in subtlety and strategy. She had navigated the office dynamics carefully, using patience, observation, and intelligence to begin changing the balance of respect. She had allowed the staff to reveal themselves, gather their insights, and demonstrate her awareness in a way that was quiet, yet undeniable. The turning point was approaching, and she was ready to act decisively when the moment arrived. As night fell, the city lights reflected softly on the streets outside, and Pam felt a quiet sense of determination. She had begun the process of correcting the misjudgment of her capabilities, and the next steps would solidify the shift in the office dynamic. She understood that true power often came quietly, through patience, observation, and timing. She was ready for the moment when her intelligence, composure, and awareness would become unmistakably clear to everyone around her. Pam Bondi had observed. She had waited, and she had acted with careful strategy. The staff's casual mockery had started to lose its power, replaced by a quiet awareness of her presence and capability. The turning point was near, and when it came, they would realize the depth of her intelligence and saint. The morning began like any other, but there was a noticeable tension in the office. Staff members moved a little more cautiously, their conversations quieter and their casual smiles slightly forced. Pam Bondi walked in with her usual calm, composed presence, but inside, she felt a quiet sense of readiness. Today was the day to shift the office dynamic completely, to turn observation and patience into action, and to make it unmistakably clear that she was fully aware of their behavior. Pam settled at her desk, reviewing reports and notes one last time. She had spent days carefully observing the staff, noting their tendencies, alliances, and the subtle ways they had mocked her. Now she had all the information she needed. She did not need to act hastily or raise her voice. She understood that a calm, measured approach would be far more powerful. Her mind was focused, her strategy clear. Expose the underestimation, assert her awareness, and command respect without unnecessary drama. By mid-morning, a meeting was called with the staff members who had been most involved in the subtle mockery. The conference room buzzed with the usual energy, but it was slightly more restrained this time. The staff entered with their casual confidence, though it was tinged with a hint of uncertainty. They had sensed that things were changing, but they did not yet understand how much Pam Bondi had noticed or planned. Pam began the meeting with her typical calm greeting, a simple nod and smile, acknowledging everyone without showing the slightest hint of the awareness she had carefully cultivated. She presented the agenda, discussed routine points, and asked for updates on ongoing projects. At first, the staff responded with their usual confidence, speaking quickly and freely, trying to maintain their sense of control. Then, Pam began to ask questions that were slightly more detailed, slightly more challenging. Her tone remained calm, but each question revealed the gaps in the staff's understanding, highlighting the areas where their preparation had been lacking. Staff members who had previously spoken confidently now hesitated, searching for answers that were incomplete or uncertain. Pam did not push or interrupt. She simply listened, allowing their own responses to reveal the truth. It was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but the energy in the room began to shift. Staff members who had been mocking felt a growing tension, a sense that their casual confidence was no longer sufficient. Pam's awareness was evident, though she did not announce it. The room had grown quiet. Every word now weighed more heavily, every answer examined carefully. Pam then moved to the core of the meeting, the part she had been preparing for. She addressed a critical project, asking for detailed explanations of processes, decisions, and expected outcomes. Her questions were precise, revealing the lack of depth in the staff's planning without direct criticism. She allowed them to answer, guiding the conversation with subtlety, encouraging them to reveal their knowledge or the gaps in it. As the discussion continued, Pam began to introduce small strategic observations that connected the dots in ways the staff had not considered. She highlighted inconsistencies gently, framed insights as part of the discussion rather than direct critique, and asked questions that required thoughtful answers. Staff members began to realize, bit by bit, that she had been fully aware of their actions, their jokes, and their underestimation all along. Then came the moment that changed everything. Pam paused for a moment, allowing the staff to reflect on a particularly complex question she had asked. She leaned forward slightly, her calm gaze sweeping the room, and spoke with clarity and authority. She revealed information about the project, demonstrating not only her deep understanding but also her awareness of how the staff had been handling their responsibilities. The staff members were stunned. Some opened their mouths to respond, but no words came out. Others shifted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. The casual confidence that had characterized the office just days ago had vanished. Pam's calm, measured revelation had exposed the gaps in their knowledge, the subtle mistakes they had made, and the way they had underestimated her intelligence and awareness. Pam continued calmly and professionally, connecting the dots between the staff's actions and the outcomes she had been monitoring. She illustrated the consequences of underestimating leadership, showing that intelligence and strategic thinking were far more effective than casual confidence or whispered jokes. Her words were firm yet measured, authoritative without being aggressive. The staff realized they had been misjudged, and that their misjudgment had been obvious to her all along. As she spoke, the room became quiet, the staff listening intently. The subtle mockery that had been part of the office environment was gone, replaced by a growing respect for her awareness and composure. Pam did not gloat, did not raise her voice, and did not humiliate anyone. Instead, she demonstrated authority through intelligence, calm observation, and strategic insight. The effect was far more powerful than any confrontation or reprimand could have been. One by one, staff members began to adjust their posture, their tone, and their expressions. They asked questions, sought clarification, and spoke with a new sense of seriousness. Pam responded with clarity and patience, guiding the discussion without diminishing anyone, but making it clear that their casual behavior and underestimation were no longer tolerated. Respect was being established, not demanded through anger, but earned through awareness, composure, and strategic demonstration. The atmosphere in the room shifted completely. What had once been casual mockery had transformed into attentiveness, careful listening, and thoughtful engagement. Pam's presence, her calm authority, and her strategic handling of the situation had fundamentally altered the office dynamics. Staff who had previously whispered and joked now spoke cautiously, aware that their actions were fully observed and understood. Pam allowed the meeting to continue, carefully balancing guidance, questions, and observations. She reinforced positive contributions, while subtly highlighting gaps that needed attention. The staff began to see the importance of preparation, observation, and accountability. The subtle mockery that had defined their behavior was replaced by professionalism, focus, and a recognition of Pam's intelligence and authority. After the meeting, as staff returned to their desks, the change was evident. Conversations were quieter, more thoughtful, and more respectful. The whispers and smirks had disappeared, replaced by a new awareness of Pam's presence and capability. She walked through the office, calm and composed, observing the subtle adjustments in behavior. The staff had begun to understand that their underestimation had consequences, and that she had been fully aware of everything all along. Pam reflected quietly on the success of the day. Her strategy had worked perfectly. She had taken subtle observation and patience and transformed them into a clear demonstration of authority and awareness. She had not needed to confront anyone aggressively or create conflict. Her intelligence, composure, and strategic approach had done the work for her. The staff had learned an important lesson without embarrassment or hostility, and the office dynamic had shifted in a way that would have lasting effects. As the day drew to a close, Pam reviewed her notes, thinking about the next steps. She had established her awareness, asserted her intelligence, and earned the respect that had been lacking. The staff were now more attentive, more thoughtful, and more cautious in their interactions. The office environment had transformed, and she had achieved it quietly, strategically, and effectively. Walking through the office one last time, she noticed the small details that had changed, the way staff spoke to each other, the careful attention to her presence, the newfound focus in their work. Pam felt a quiet satisfaction. The subtle mockery that had once existed was gone, replaced by a culture of respect, awareness, and professionalism. Her strategy had worked, and she had done it without creating unnecessary conflict or drama. On her way home, Pam reflected on the events of the day. She had turned observation and patience into action, and in doing so, she had reshaped the office dynamic completely. She understood that intelligence, awareness, and strategic thinking were far more powerful than anger or confrontation. The staff had underestimated her, assumed that her calm demeanor indicated weakness, and failed to recognize her capability. That misjudgment had been their mistake, and she had handled it with grace and authority. Pam Bondi's day had been extraordinary, not in appearance, but in strategy and impact. She had observed, weighted, and acted with precision, demonstrating awareness, intelligence, and authority. The staff had revealed themselves, and she had used that information to shift the office dynamic, subtly but effectively. Respect had been earned, and the casual mockery that had defined the office culture was no longer present. As night fell, and the city lights reflected off the streets, Pam felt a deep sense of satisfaction. She had managed to assert her authority, demonstrate her awareness, and command respect, all without confrontation or aggression. The staff had learned a powerful lesson about underestimating someone with intelligence, composure, and strategic insight. And Pam had done it quietly, effectively, and professionally. Pam Bondi had observed, planned, and acted. The staff's casual mockery had been replaced by attentiveness and respect. The office dynamic had shifted completely, and her strategy had proved